Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 16 of season 2 of Arrow. And this is it, guys. This is our Suicide Squad episode. This is one that's been building for a long time, and it really does deliver. This is basically everything that made Suicide Squad cool in the comics in a nutshell. Anyway, well, we'll get into talking about Suicide Squad in a minute. Right now, I kind of want to start talking about the little things, and then we'll kind of move into the more detailed stuff. So, let's kind of since this was mainly a Diggle episode, and this is we haven't had a Diggle episode since he went to Russia, and Lila and him and his ex-wife Lila started on their road to reconciliation, which of course takes some seriously big steps this episode. So let's just kind of talk about what's going on with other folks right now. And we might as well start off with let's talk about Felicity, since she had a little bit of a nice moment with Diggle. And again, this is just this is kind of feels like it's like, okay, here's our obligatory Felicity scene or two for this episode, since she's not one of the major focuses of this episode. And, well, that's okay, all in all. I mean, she does her thing of helping out Oliver, and she does have a very nice little moment with Diggle, where she does drop a little interesting little tidbit about having had a stalker at one point. And I do like the fact that she pointedly reminds them that, you know what, I did have a life before I met you and Oliver. And I have a feeling that this is kind of them signaling to us that something from Felicity's past is going to come up into play, and I believe it's 6 or 7 episodes left in the season. And of course, the Felicity's also talked about her dad, so it's kind of says to me that's where they're going to be going with this. Now, again, I'm still not 100% on board with the idea that Professor Ivo is her dad. I'm okay with that either way. I just honestly, I hope they do something a little bit more interesting than what most people on the internet are already guessing they're going to do, to be perfectly honest about it. But anyway, it was a very nice little moment with Felicity and Diggle there. And I like how she says to him, like, look, if Slade is going to come after me, then, well, let's face it, as tough as Dig is, he's not going to be able to stand up to somebody like Slade. I mean, he's not going to be able to stand. I mean, Dig is ex-Special Forces, but he's not going to be able to stand up to a super-powered super assassin like Deathstroke. Okay, he's just not. And even Dig has already acknowledged that he can't stand up to Sarah. So, Felicity does raise a very good point. If Deathstroke decides to kill her, he's probably going to kill her. And there's not a whole lot that she can personally do about that. And there's not even much that Dig can do about it. But what's cool about Felicity is that she just accepts that this is a reality of her life, and that she's not going to let Slade Wilson scare her into, really changing the way she lives. And it is kind of cool that we get to see a little bit of where Felicity lives. There were some scenes in the Arrow comic book that were briefly seen where Felicity actually apparently lived in an apartment in Starling City proper. Here it looks more like she lives out in the burbs and just kind of commutes. Then again, that was the comics were set in season 1, so there's no saying that she couldn't have moved at some point. Just saying. Anyway. So we also let's talk about Oliver, Laurel, and Sarah and get that out of the way. So we do have another brief scene from Laurel this time. I'm not really sure how great an idea it is for somebody who's battling alcoholism to be hanging out in nightclubs. I mean, yes, Sarah serves her up a virgin drink, but if you're going through that sort of thing, from what I understand, and from what's been mentioned by Sherlock Holmes on Elementary, that if you're in that sort of situation, you're supposed to stay away from places with potential triggers. So, recovering alcoholic, nightclub, bar, not the best of choices. But Sarah does dispense some pretty good advice this time around, which is certainly nice. After that big speech that Oliver gave to her about how he was sort of tired through, dealing with all of her BS. Here, Laurel comes in there and gives Oliver some harsh words that he needs to hear. And it's nice to see that even though this is a really awkward situation with Sarah and Oliver being together, that Laurel is basically like, okay, she's accepted this. We've already seen that she's reconciled with Sarah. Here she's going to go out and have dinner with her. So basically, she's saying, okay, I might not be happy with this situation, but I'm not going to use that as an excuse to throw away this frankly miraculous reunion with my sister, who I thought was dead for 6 years. Yeah. So, points to Laurel for being the mature one on that. Now, of course, this episode really here, Oliver's thing is, of course, his desire to, like, the people I care about are in danger. I need to keep my distance from them. And, of course, this is a really foolhardy idea that Oliver's running around. He definitely can't keep his distance from his mom and his sister. Apparently, he's still living at the Queen Mansion, apparently, despite not getting along with his mom, although I guess he was sleeping in the Arrow Cave when he had that creepy dream about Shadow. Oliver, you're really rich. I'm sure you can afford a nice apartment somewhere, not too far from the Glades. I mean, there has to be someplace decent. I mean, there's probably all kinds of gentrification going on in that neighborhood, especially in the wake of an earthquake. Yeah. Well, we'll just leave that detail there. Anyway. So, of course, so again, the whole thing is Oliver is basically even trying to push Sarah away, which is frankly pretty ridiculous because, well, let's face it, after Oliver, you can't think that Slade can't also want to kill Sarah because, she's the one that Oliver chose over Shadow. So, the idea that if Oliver stays away from her, that Slade's just going to leave her alone, well, that's ridiculous. Especially since Slade knows for sure that she's in Starling City and is allied with Oliver. And you have to think that having somebody with, League of Assassins training and, that cool canary cry technology, Sarah is an enormous asset in this battle with Slade. And there is no sidelining her on this. She is involved. It's like I said, there's no way Slade is just going to leave her alone. So, frankly, I mean, Oliver's just being an idiot here by thinking that he can help. He's making these people safer by putting distance between them. He's not. He needs to get, he needs to seriously rally the troops if he's going to take down Slade. And, finally, this is really what he manages to realize at the end with Sarah's help, and of course, some pointed words from Laurel. I also like that we got to see the Bratva guy again, and this guy is, to me, unintentionally hilarious. Remember when we first saw him, Oliver goes down to his auto body shop and starts trying to say like, hey, I'm in the Bratva. I want to talk I want a favor. I need some help finding this guy. And they kind of blow him off, and then the Bratva main guy, the bald dude, sends his mechanic to try and beat Oliver up, and Oliver smacks the guy down in like 10 seconds. And then, Oliver establishes his credentials and blah, blah, blah. No. Basically, the guy says, okay, I'm going to check you out and make sure you're really Bratva. And if you're not, I'm going to send that guy that you just beat up to kill your family. I was like, oh, you're going to send a guy who I know I can kick all over this room to hurt my family. Well, I certainly feel threatened. And here this guy does it again. He starts talking all this stuff to somebody he knows can tear him and his guys apart. And this guy is just so damn stupid. It's like, man, you are poking a tiger. Now, granted, he does raise a point that this Bratva thing is supposed to be, you do me a favor, I do you a favor. But let's not pretend that, you got this guy and Oliver on equal footing here. I mean, I don't know exactly what this guy's rank is. He's, I assume, also probably a captain or of similar rank. But, yeah, man, you don't threaten somebody who you know can stomp you into the dirt. And this guy never figures this out. Just watching him constantly try and talk tough to Oliver is, to me, absolutely hilarious. Now, what is not hilarious is in the subtitles for that conversation, they write all right as one word. That is not correct! Okay? I have mentioned before many times that my job is an English teacher. And this is one of those things that really annoys the hell out of me. Now, to be completely fair, it is established in professional circles, shall we say, that writing all right as one word has gained some acceptance in the United Kingdom. But it is still considered by users of both American and Commonwealth, which is what I prefer to say instead of British English, that writing all right as one word is grammatically incorrect. And everybody who basically has to use proper grammar for their jobs, like journalists and writers and all this, everybody is in agreement. You do not do that. Also, free tip from your friendly neighborhood English teacher: never write no one as one word. I swear to God, I want to strangle someone on the internet every single time I see that. Okay, this is stuff we all learned in elementary school. So if you've passed the 3rd grade, you have no reasonable excuse to be making this mistake. I sometimes take my job just a little too seriously. Okay, so moving on. But let's go back to what's going on with Oliver. So I like how in this episode we totally see that Slade is still in control and still playing with him. He sets up these home movies of Shadow in the offices of the Bratva guy, whom he's killed by driving an arrow through his eye. Which, cool. So, one wonders how the Starling City Police are going to react to that particular thing, but, anyway, hard to kind of wonder where Slade dug up those home movies, but, again, not really important. And then Oliver goes out there and he finds that mask just stuck up there on that pole, and you have to wonder if that probably actually is the same mask that was on the island. And if it is, then no wonder Oliver was so freaking out. It also kind of makes you wonder if maybe the person that put that mask there in the first place wasn't Slade, as a reminder of his promise to Oliver that someday I'm going to make you suffer for what you've done. And then, of course, we get that scene at the end where now Oliver and Waller have had some tangential contact on the show before, but here it's really strongly implied that these two know each other much, much better than anyone we've ever been led to believe before. And of course, this is where Waller mentions that the whole we've been calling him Deathstroke. Now, it does seem a little odd that Waller has no idea who this guy is, but we've established that that Slade is very, very good at what he does. And, remember, Slade did come from the intelligence community. He knows how people like Waller think. And while he might have been more of a soldier than anything, he does have that sort of training. So, the fact that he can do all this and Waller still doesn't really know very much about him, well, that's pretty not exactly unreasonable. The intelligence guys hadn't done a very good job of tracking down Deadshot either. It took Oliver to take him down. So, there's that. Anyway, now I think that kind of covers everything, so let's kind of get into the meat of the story. Now, one thing that I definitely did like is if you're paying attention, there's a lot of really cool little Easter eggs in this episode. They mention several fictional countries. Of course, Markovia, where most of the action is supposed to take place, has been repeatedly mentioned. They also brought up Kurak, which basically is Well, it was actually created back in the 1980s as a fictional, sort of Middle Eastern country. But in the early 90s, they basically used it as a stand-in for Iraq when they decided they wanted to start telling some stories that dealt with, in the DC universe, that basically dealt with another version of the Gulf War. Using real wars is always kind of a touchy topic for these sort of things in comics because you're dealing with real events, real people dying. If you use fictional nations, then you can make things much more metaphorical. And, if you want to blow up the country's capital, which is actually what Cheshire did in the comics, then, people are a little bit less inclined to get angry about it. We also had mentioned, and I don't believe this has been mentioned before on the show, the country of Kundak or Kurak. I can't remember exactly. Kondak, that's right. Kondak is how you say it. Just glance at my notes here. And this is, of course, another fictional country in the DC universe that is the home of the villain Black Adam, a very big deal. Rival of Captain Marvel, although these days DC's Captain Marvel goes by the name Shazam. So, this could kind of be a little subtle nod to them. Black Adam's powers come from magic. So it could be them sort of starting to take a step in the direction of maybe somewhere down the road introducing magic onto the show, which would be really cool. But we'll talk about that, maybe talk about that a little bit more later. So anyway, of course, this episode, the big thing is Suicide Squad. Consists of Shrapnel, Bronze Tiger, Deadshot, Lila, and Diggle. Now, I really had a feeling that Shrapnel was not going to survive this episode, simply because they had to make it for real that these guys do have those bombs implanted in them. And Shrapnel was really the most... Well, basically, his job in this mission was getaway driver, which seems like a really foolish thing to do with a guy who's an explosives expert. So it kind of made sense that they were going to kill him off. He's also the character from the comics with the least fleshed out background. So again, it made the most sense to get rid of him. Of course, that also leaves a potential opening down the road for... Well, we'll talk about her later. So anyway, this is an episode where we kind of get our first flashback that doesn't really revolve around Oliver, and this is, of course, going back to Afghanistan, seeing Dig meet Lila for the first time. We get to see Ben Browder again. He doesn't really get to do anything terribly spectacular this time around, but it does go and show us that, yeah, Ted Gaynor, before he went bad, seems like he was genuinely an alright guy. We get to see the enactment of the story that Diggle had told earlier about where he was forced to kill a kid, and how that's something that's always haunted him. And we get to see that, yeah, Lila, even back when she was just an ordinary soldier, was still a very smart, very competent person. And, it's no wonder that she's really become this badass secret agent. And of all people, they continue to flesh out Deadshot. That whole thing with his daughter, well, that's from the comics. There was a miniseries that Deadshot had where you basically find out that in his younger days he had fathered a daughter with a prostitute, and he, ever since then he found out about her. He's been discreetly using the money that he has to take care of her. I think there was even a story where his daughter and the mom were living in this really bad neighborhood, and there was a gang war going on. And simply because, gang war in my daughter's neighborhood means that she's potentially at risk, Deadshot just basically went in there and personally murdered all the gangbangers in the area, just out of the possibility that they might put his daughter in the path of danger. Which just goes to show you that Deadshot is not someone to mess around with. And it is interesting to see his relationship with Dig. You can see that Deadshot maybe doesn't exactly regret what it is that he's done, but it seems like he doesn't really take pleasure in what it is that he does. And again, earlier he said that he's someone who believes in honor. So you have to wonder if maybe Deadshot isn't, at least maybe a little remorseful. Maybe someone who's realized because he's obviously had a lot of time to think about things lately. You know what? Maybe I am better for more in this world than just being an assassin for hire. And Deadshot is one of those characters who's always at least especially these days, is kind of danced the line between, well, I wouldn't say between villain and anti-hero is really the best way to put it. Deadshot is in no way, shape, or form a good guy, but he is someone who does have a code, who does sometimes do things that equal good in the world. A way to think of it might be like Dexter from the HBO shows, that Showtime show, I should say, and the novels, where Dexter is a serial killer who preys on other serial killers, and ultimately you can argue that he's probably a net gain in terms of good for the universe. Deadshot is a guy who these days mostly kills other bad guys, so he's probably ultimately maybe someone who has done more good. You can argue maybe he does more good than he does bad. It's very debatable. But that's, of course, what makes anti-heroes such compelling characters. Not a whole lot to say about Bronze Tiger. I was really disappointed that they didn't give him more to do. Although I was glad that he did get a moment there at the end where he at least got to kill the main terrorist guy, because otherwise he just sort of got shot, and then nobody really reacted terribly strongly to the fact that there was a dead man who'd just been murdered laying on the ground a few feet away. That, I think, was, honestly, that was pretty unintentionally hilarious in my book. We already talked about Shrapnel. Not a huge amount to say about what's going on with Dig and Lila. It's just nice to kind of see them together. Lila's a very interesting character, and I love the fact that they were hooking up in the Ostrander suite. John Ostrander, of course, is the writer who created the Suicide Squad, a very, very venerable comic book writer, done some really great work on stuff like Power of Shazam, and in my book he's arguably the best guy to ever write Star Wars comics. I mean, he has written some really, really great Star Wars stuff. Basically created the whole Star Wars legacy era. Did the absolutely phenomenal Dawn of the Jedi. Oh, guys, if you like Star Wars, go read some Dawn of the Jedi. It is insanely good. So, yeah, definitely cool there. If I remember correctly, Ostrander was also the co-creator of Amanda Waller. And it was interesting, in prep for this episode, they did an interview with him and asked him, well, how do you feel about the way you originally created Amanda Waller, where she was sort of middle-aged, short, very... I wouldn't exactly say fat, but she was a very compact, good-sized lady. And now she's been played more recently by as somebody late 20s, in her 20s, 30s, played by rather tall, very thin ladies. And Ostrander was basically said, well, one of the it's not what I basically said. Yeah, I'm not too happy that this is what they've ultimately decided to do with Waller, take her and basically make her younger and sexier. I created her that way because I wanted the sort of character that you just don't normally see in comics. And, I think Ostrander raises a very excellent point. You don't normally see characters like that in comics. But, well, it's entertainment, and, young and sexy is what puts butts in the seats, right? And at the end of the day, comics are a business. So, honestly, I can kind of see both sides of the argument, and I don't really have a huge opinion about it one way or the other. Let me see here. Yeah, okay, let's talk about the big wow moment of this episode, and it is, of course, Harley Quinn. Now, for folks who haven't been keeping up with what's been going on online, it's basically confirmed that the voice there, that was Tara Strong, who has done the voice for Harley in the recent Batman Arkham games. And of course, Tara Strong, very, very venerable voice actress. Probably my favorite female voice actor ever. She is just awesome. I've loved her ever since she was Riku in Final Fantasy X. I mean, her list of credentials is just beyond insane. And just the fact that they even brought her in just to do these 2 lines really says that they're willing to go that extra step for the fans. Now, the actress who we actually saw in the cell, from behind with just the blonde hair, that's a lady named Cassidy Alexa. And in the build-up to this, she actually posted this really interesting picture of herself on Twitter with some big red Joker-like makeup on her face and holding a lollipop and kind of giving this crazy grin. Now, she never said, "I am playing Harley Quinn on Arrow." But a lot of people on Twitter were just going absolutely crazy, and she was, constantly retweeting all these tweets of, people saying, "Oh, I think you're going to be a great Harley Quinn. I can't wait to see you on Arrow." And it looks ultimately like she's probably, and I don't mean this in an unkind way, just going to end up being a glorified extra. And since that's probably the case, I can't imagine that this wasn't, just her taking advantage of having some extra spotlight. Hollywood is a business. You got to promote yourself, and I don't really begrudge this lady that one little bit. And technically, she was Harley Quinn in sort of the same way that David Proust, the guy who was physically in the Darth Vader costume in the original Star Wars movies, was also technically Darth Vader. It's just when we think, who was Darth Vader? Well, most people jump to James Earl Jones because he was the voice of Darth Vader. But, you have to give Proust his fair share of credit. He really did a great job of projecting the physical aspects of Darth Vader, and Darth Vader would not be Darth Vader without his contribution. So, let's give Miss Alexa her fair share of credit. Now, people are wondering, well, are they going to bring Harley onto Arrow full-on proper? Well, maybe. Let's take a look at this whole situation. One, Batman villains are really basically very much on par with Green Arrow. They generally tend not to have superpowers, or they have some technological edge, something that could give Oliver a run for his money, but for more or less, they're kind of characters who are on equal footing with him. So it makes sense for the show to draw from the Batman universe. We've already had Firefly as a villain on the show. I mean, Huntress is a character who comes from the Batman comics, but she's kind of one of those characters who you can't really say that she's a member of the, as they like to say in online comic book fandom, the Bat family. She kind of goes back and forth. She's really, honestly, more as likely to be opposed to what Batman is trying to do as she is to help him. You never know what's going on with Huntress. She's just a real wild card. So, but again, here they've brought in Huntress, and she's here. And, so kind of the idea of having Harley Quinn come in, well, that's not entirely unreasonable. Now, of course, people online have been going, well, if Harley Quinn exists, then the Joker must already exist in this universe, and you can't have the Joker without Batman, so, okay. All this firmly does is really establish, one, at some point, in some way, shape, or form, it is certain, basically, that Batman and the Joker will come into existence in the Arrow universe. Will we ever see them on Arrow? Well, I think Batman and the Joker are pretty unlikely. But Harley Quinn is kind of like I said, like Huntress. She's a Gotham character, but she's not exclusively a Batman character. And I believe I've mentioned this before when we saw Harley's brief little cameo last time around, is what they're trying to do with Harley these days, and that's what the current writers of Harley's comic, which actually just put out issue 4 yesterday, if I remember correctly, have said that they're kind of trying to turn her into sort of the Deadpool of the DC universe. So Harley's gotten she was a member of Suicide Squad. I think she was also in the Secret Six. And she's got her own series, which, as I understand it, she's still in Gotham City, but she's basically, they're trying to make her still a Gotham character, but also a character who is a part of the greater DC universe. She's not someone who's not strongly confined to just the Batman side of things. And given Harley's popularity, I think that's a good move. I like the idea that Harley is somebody who can show up anywhere, and it doesn't automatically have to tie into the Joker, or you don't have to automatically expect that Batman is going to show up or something like that. I think that's all just fine. But as I said, there's only about 7 episodes of the show left, so the idea of them, trotting out Harley seems a little bit unlikely. But what we do know for sure is that the writers have, and they even said before they got the go-ahead for the 3rd season, they're already planning the 3rd season. Now, if you were to say bring Harley back in some form in season 3, well, this would make sense because, again, like I said, they've already used Huntress, they've already used Nissa Al Ghul, Ra's al Ghul has been constantly mentioned. So all of these things from the Batman comics showing up on Arrow, I don't think that's going to stop. And one thing that Arrow has constantly done is, find a way to keep upping the stakes. Last year the big bad was Malcolm Merlyn. This year the big bad is Deathstroke. And a lot of things that people have been saying online is feel like the next season their big bad is going to be Ra's al Ghul himself. Well, again, that's just online speculation, but it would make sense. So if you're going to do something like that and bring in Ra's al Ghul, well, why not? Obviously you want to save him for when it's really going to count next season, but obviously you're going to want some big, your big guest stars, guest characters from the DC universe, and bringing her in next season would make a lot of sense for Harley, because they've already said, we're building up to our version of the Birds of Prey. Huntress is coming back next week. We know that. So we've already got, Felicity and Black Canary roaming around. Just the fact that they've said that they're going to try and do their version of Birds of Prey next season gives me a lot of hope that Sarah is, in fact, going to survive this season. And if they bring back Suicide Squad again, and from what the writers have been saying, yeah, it's pretty likely that we're going to see Suicide Squad again. I mean, this episode itself heavily implies that Suicide Squad might end up helping Oliver take down Deathstroke. Well, like I said, Harley is established in the comics to have at one point been a member of the Suicide Squad. And we've seen that, Waller's got her locked up in that cell, and now the squad is down a man now that Shrapnel is dead. So seeing Harley Quinn next season makes a lot more sense than seeing her this season, because there's so many elements on the board. They've really got to start, ticking things off in the build-up to the season finale, and bringing in a major guest from the DC universe just doesn't quite fit in my book yet. This is not really a time to be introducing major new characters. This is a time to start wrapping things up, or amping things up so that you can wrap things up, I should say. Now, if they do bring Harley in next season, are they going to bring in Cassidy Alexa again? Well, I'm going to think probably not. I think this is another situation where you had some other actress play Sarah Lance for less than 5 minutes of screen time that she had in episode 1, and then that was it. And then, of course, season 2, when Sarah is genuinely a real character, you bring in somebody like Katie Lotz, who can do everything that Sarah needs to do, the physical stuff and all that. Now that Harley, though, has been given a voice, basically if they do bring her in, you need someone who can do a pretty good riff on the Tara Strong, Arlene Sorkin Harley voice, and make it seem like that's someone's natural speaking voice and not somebody just standing there doing a goofy voice for the sake of doing a goofy voice. So that really is my only concern with what they would be doing with Harley. Now, I also imagine that they're probably not going to go for the more bikini-like costume that she rocked for a little while in the comics. I think they'd probably go for something a little bit more in keeping with what we saw in the Arkham games, where her clothes are a little bit more existent. Yeah. But again, that's all just speculation. I just kind of wanted to put out what I think realistically we are looking at in terms of that. At the end of the day, this could ultimately just turn out to have been, sort of a fun little thing for the fans, but I don't know. Given how popular Harley is and how much DC has really been wanting to push her lately, I really could see them bringing Harley in as an occasionally reoccurring character starting next season. And she would be a pretty interesting member of both Suicide Squad or the Birds of Prey, or an antagonist for the Birds of Prey. There's just so much you could do with her. And it would also be pretty fun. It's like, oh god, we've got someone even crazier than Huntress running around. And then there's the idea of, hey, she's also a trained psychologist. Wouldn't it be fun if Oliver finally decided to get some professional help? And it turned out that's, escaped Harley Quinn. Okay, well, I think I've indulged in enough speculation for one day. So, and this video is over half an hour, so I'm going to wrap it up here, guys. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.